We're starting off with the news that the Denver Broncos have signed cornerback Pat Surtain to a record-breaking contract. He becomes the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. And Surtain, it feels like, has sort of flown under the radar a little bit since he was drafted in 2021 because of the fact that the Broncos as a whole haven't been a great team. That defense especially has not been incredible either, but that is sort of covering up the fact that Surtain has been one of the best cornerbacks really since the moment that he stepped into the league two seasons ago now. In 2022, he was selected to the AP first team, All-Pro first team, and he is coming off of back-to-back Pro Bowl seasons. So the Broncos get in early here to make sure that they can lock him down for the foreseeable future. A 4-year deal worth $96 million, $77.5 million in guaranteed money. And moving forward, he should be somebody that they are going to hope to continue to build around. He is going to be making $24 million in average annual value, which surpasses Jair Alexander as the highest paid cornerback in the league. And like I mentioned, the Broncos defense being not spectacular these past couple years has sort of covered up the fact that Surtain has been elite. And you have a lot of young cornerbacks that have really been coming onto the scene these past couple years. Sauce Gardner, obviously, has been tremendous from day one, that people just sort of slotted him into that number one spot, which I'm not saying is wrong entirely, but that's also sort of just, I don't know how all of these people just sort of leapfrogged Pat Surtain when he is just as young and exciting. He's still just 24 years old and has played 3 years in the NFL. And he has just consistently been getting results. Now, again, the fact that the Broncos aren't that good definitely does disguise the level of success personally that he's been having. But I think this is a great investment for the Broncos. Like I mentioned, still just 24 years old. By the time that this contract expires following the 2029 season, he won't even be 30 years old yet. And typically, I don't love, spending big on cornerbacks for the long-term future, because I do think that cornerback is a position where we have seen historically drop-offs tend to kick in a little bit sooner than some other positions. It's a position that is very reliant on athleticism, considering the fact that you have to mirror these up-and-coming star wide receivers and do it basically all in reverse while backpedaling. So it is a position that I do think doesn't always age perfectly. But that being said, I find it hard to believe that Surtain, by the time that this contract expires, is going to be a negative deal for the Broncos. And I think that overall, adding 4 years to what is currently on his deal is probably the perfect timeline, because again, Surtain, he will be 29 years old coming off of that contract. He'll probably, as long as he is still a prevalent force in the NFL, be able to cash out one more time heading into his 30s. And, from there, again, it can be a little bit of a crapshoot in terms of how players at cornerback end up developing long term. But again, I think for the Broncos, there were some rumors about the idea that they could look to trade Surtain, but he's still young enough to the point that the Broncos have a lot of almost culture building to do, considering the fact that it's been very messy for them the past couple years, ever since, of course, the Russell Wilson trade, but then even last year as well, with Sean Payton coming in, sort of coaxing him out of retirement by giving him this massive contract as well. The Broncos are expecting to be able to win under Sean Payton. To what extent that is definitely still to be determined, but they aren't hoping to just bottom out and be uncompetitive during this time, because Sean Payton, I'm sure, isn't trying to coach another 10 years, that they paid big for him. They want to get results, and they have a player that it's not like they're just investing into because they're desperate, because Pat Surtain is a very good value player and can continue to be somebody that they build around. And you look at the Broncos defense, and overall, it's a mostly underwhelming group. Zach Allen is a nice player on that front end. I like some of their linebackers, Alex Singleton being one of them, but overall, you look up and down the board, and there are not very many cornerstones whatsoever to build around outside of Pat Surtain. And if you let him walk, yeah, sure, you could probably get a good return in terms of assets, but then you just look like a totally barren team on that defensive side of the ball. And again, they're trying to manufacture their way into at least competitive. I don't want to go contenders at this point, because I do think that the Broncos are still a ways away until they get to that point. Obviously, playing in the AFC West that is as well doesn't really do you any favors, because the Chiefs aren't expected to let up anytime soon. There's a lot of optimism as well about the Chargers now with Jim Harbaugh in town, that he should be able to, within the next, call it 2 years. I think 2 seasons is really just about the maximum amount of time it'll take for Harbaugh to really turn the Chargers around. Now, maybe I'm overly optimistic there, but the history of Harbaugh would show that typically when he arrives somewhere, it doesn't take all that long to be able to sort of transform it into a winner. So, the Chargers have the pieces. They have Harbaugh, they have Justin Herbert, and the Raiders, the Raiders are definitely a little bit more of a gray area in terms of what their exact path is. Pulling for Antonio Pierce, the interim coach that was hired full-time this past offseason. They have some good players. I'm very stuck up on the quarterback situation there, and they don't have their answer there yet. But that being said, if they end up picking in the top 10 and getting a Shedeur Sanders or a Carson Beck, somebody that could be their long-term option, who knows, really? So, again, it's not a star-studded division necessarily, but the fact that the Chiefs are in the way is a huge obstacle to overcome. So, again, the Broncos have a way to go here, but there's a lot of optimism about what Sean Payton can do with the offense this upcoming season, drafting Bo Nix 12th overall. A lot of NFL fans, I should say, aren't exactly sky high on Bo Nix, and there's reasons for that. The fact that, it really took him a long time to come into a positive quarterback at the college level, and now we're talking about, can he make that next jump to the NFL, where his arm strength, or a little bit lack thereof, could be a little bit more well documented, the speed of the game, all of the adjustments you have to make when taking that leap. That being said, quarterbacks, drafting them in the first round is just as much as a crapshoot, as I mentioned earlier, with cornerbacks on that second contract. So there's a lot of guessing games, of course, in the NFL, but ultimately, I think that their offense could be semi-productive this upcoming season, and it's going to be that defense that's really going to push them. Again, obviously, still a bit question mark with Bo Nix on the offense, so I'm not saying it's just the defense, especially because it's most areas of the defense that they need to really lock up. But I think Pat Surtain is a great start. If you want to be able to compete with the elite offenses and shut them down, the number one rule is you need somebody to match up against their number one and go rep for rep with them. And Pat Surtain is 100% a player that I think is capable of that. And again, cornerback is also such a weird position in terms of counting stats can be very deceptive with how they play, because if you're doing your job right as a cornerback, you're not going to have very many pass deflections or interceptions, because they're not going to be throwing to you. So I mean, if you look at the statistics for Surtain last season, I mean, I suppose it's a little bit down, but at the same time, not really something that I'm putting all too much stock into. I believe in the process. I believe in the film. Surtain has been a stud since he was with Alabama. He was worthy of a top 10 pick at the time, ended up going number 9 overall, and he has given the Broncos no reason to regret that decision up to this point. So, again, he gets to cash out, become the highest paid player, defensive back in NFL history. The Broncos get somebody that they can hope to continue building around on that side of the ball. And I think this is a win-win deal, especially considering the fact that the Broncos really don't have all that much money tied up into different players other than Russell Wilson, who isn't even on the team anymore. But you look at their overall payroll, they're in the bottom portion of the league, and they have money to spend. So why not go and get yourself an elite cornerback, lock him up for the future? Again, we know how these things work in terms of the progression of these contracts. They're only going to continue to get more expensive. For whatever it's worth as well, just about every team in the NFL could use a star young cornerback. So the hope, I'm sure, is for the Broncos to be able to, in the next couple of seasons, really find out what their identity is and start to make a push towards being one of those more competitive perennial playoff teams. But if that doesn't end up being the case, Surtain, I think, would be a great trade chip to have on the books, especially as these other contracts start to fly off as well, and he gets pushed down the list a little bit more. But again, I have no problem whatsoever with this move from the Broncos, and it's a lot of unknown with their future at this current moment. But again, with Sean Payton in the building, they are hoping to jumpstart themselves a little bit, and the fact that they have somebody the skill level of Pat Surtain to continue to build around, I think, is a huge positive. But definitely be sure to let us know how you feel in the comments section, as we are now going to dive into a couple other contracts that were announced yesterday. The holdout with 49ers offensive tackle Trent Williams has finally come to a close. It's been a very noisy offseason for the 49ers in regards to contract negotiations. So now that everybody seems to be on the same page, what can we expect out of the Super Bowl runner-ups from last season? And then additionally, the Pittsburgh Steelers decided to go out and spend on one of their veterans in Cameron Hayward. So we will break down the details of both of those contracts. But first, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.